Okay, so I'm just going to read this piece. It's a short prose piece that I wrote for this. It's called Chinatown of My Dreams. According to the myth, it is a town that has existed in many different parts of the world in many different time periods. This is what the artist Cau, the one that Ken just mentioned, said about the myth she wrote for her film La Town. Sometimes my Chinatown is like La Town, a mythical town. I dreamed it. I dreamed of it. I dreamed of living there. I was working at Cafe China in Midtown. Most of the kitchen staff lived in Flushing and Elmhurst, and most of the younger front-of-house staff lived in Bay Ridge and Sunset Park. They thought I was nuts for wanting to live in Chinatown in Manhattan instead of Chinatown in Brooklyn. But they tried to help me. They told me I should search through ads in the Chinese newspapers, or go find the flyers with little tear-off phone number tabs taped on traffic signal and streetlight poles. I could barely read Chinese, though, so all I could do was walk around looking for the flyers, and if it seemed like the ad was for a room in an apartment, I would tear off the number. And then I would coerce one of my coworkers to call the number for me and get the details. I tried to make the calls myself first, but when I asked where the apartment was located, I couldn't understand the Chinese versions of the names of streets in Chinatown. I looked at a bunch of rooms. I looked at the vacant bedroom for rent in Su Feng Chu's apartment. It had a bunk bed in it that she said had to stay. Would I sleep on the top or bottom bunk? What would I do with the one I wasn't sleeping on? I dream of this apartment I live in with Su Feng Chu. For a long time, according to the unknowable algorithms of the T9 predictive text function on my phone, her name, SIU, would pop up when I was trying to text the word sit. In the life where I live with her in her apartment, or rather our shared apartment, I live in a room that has a bunk bed in it. Sometimes I sleep on the top bunk, sometimes on the bottom. Sometimes I miss having a full-size bed, a bed that is not attached to another bed. At a different place, the guy showed up to the door wearing sweatpants and holding a big rectangular knife. He had been in the middle of chopping up some raw pork, which lay interrupted and pinkish on the round chopping block balanced over the kitchen sink. I don't even like taking baths, but I dream of another apartment that has only a bathtub, no shower plumbing. In this life, I become extraordinarily handy, somehow finagling my own makeshift shower attachment. Or I learn to love taking baths. Yet another Chinatown exists for me at Misum Cafe. I wake up early and go to Misum to have pidan shourouzo and read a book. Maybe I've shed all of my old life, and nobody I know now knows me then. Maybe the world has ended, and Misum still stands. Every Thursday, I go to Chinese class, through the volunteer-run Allison and the YMCA, in the middle school high school at 100 Hester Street. It's a Mandarin 2 class that's not really at the appropriate level for me, but it's something. Before class, I go to Tang Tou Wang to eat niuza mi fan and a small order of dumplings. Most likely, even post-apocalypse, there's something static about my Thursday evening ritual in Chinatown. The train stops, the smoke clears, and from the ashes, I'm still on my way to Chinese class. The rest of my life has been the fantasy, it turns out. It turns out the only thing that was real was Chinese school. Those torturous Sunday morning hours from when I was 4 to when I was 18. And now this. It turns out the intervening years, over a dozen years, all of my 20s and more, was a fiction. I am back now. Back in a public high school during off hours. Back in Chinese class, this time on a different coast. There is a mystery here, but it's really only me. I don't recognize myself, the one who has returned to Chinese school. I slink around Bayard, Allen, and Mott, Eldridge, and Pell, as if I've left something here. As if someone has left here for me some notes, a few clues, essential for my survival. Sometimes when I talk to my parents on Skype, having run out of things to say, having run out of updates to give, my dad will ask me if I've been to Chinatown recently. I'm not sure why he asks me this. Maybe he asks me this because in the late 60s, around 1970, when he was in college in Illinois, he would come to New York during his summer breaks and work in a restaurant owned by a friend or relative of a friend or relative. The restaurant was in Brooklyn, but he hung out in this Chinatown. Somehow, when we Skype, while I'm sitting in my apartment in Prospect Heights, and he is sitting with my mom in their house in California, we are meeting in Chinatown. Maybe I imagined it, but it contains truth. There are other Chinatowns in my dreams. The one in downtown LA, the sprawling ones of Alhambra, San Gabriel, Monterey Park, Chinatowns I visited in London or Paris, San Francisco, Philly. Once I walked miles, hours to get to a Chinatown of sorts, a shantytown Chinese market in Budapest, which consisted of rows and rows of shipping containers turned into stalls and shops, and everyone sat around makeshift tables playing cards with stacks of cash. Everyone had walkie-talkies, and as I walked around, there was a wave of activity, a flurry that traveled like a wave, and like a wave, all the shops and stands and stalls shut down as I walked through the rows until there was nobody and nothing. Maybe I made all of it up. The truth is, I go to Chinatown to disappear. Sometimes I do disappear. In many of my other spaces, the dust settles and anyone at any point can narrow me down. Asian, Chinese. In Chinatown, I am gone. Sometimes an old woman will come up to me and ask me directions in Chinese. Sometimes I can answer, sometimes I know where. But even then, I am nowhere to be seen. I am a ghost weaving through the streets of Chinatown. I float over to the shops on Grand Street and hover over the houseplants. I float over to haunt tasty hand-pulled noodles, Shanghai house, Shanghai Asian cuisine. Detached from everyone and everything, I float over to Spicy Village, Pho Grand, and Taiwan Pork Chop House, my favorite places to eat by myself. Read a book while eating. For a post-meal treat, I smoke a cigarette and buy a knife at Bowery Restaurant Supply. Tao Fei says that it's impossible to tell where or when La Town is occurring. The Chinatown of my dreams is also something that mysteriously occurs. It is slippery. It occurs in many different places and in many different times and forms. Like La Town, the story, the myth of it, comes together organically, one piece at a time. In this mythical Chinatown, I step carefully through the wet floors of the fish vendors to the stairs going up to my apartment. But I've never lived in Chinatown. Once, 3 years ago, I was drunk and vowed I wouldn't leave New York without having lived in Chinatown. I haven't lived in Chinatown yet. I haven't left New York. Not yet. The illusion is so perfect. Maybe I didn't make any of it up.